mixed in between there, I'm smashing gender roles, you know? Okay, so the record is called Bought to Rot, and it's about wasted potential. And it comes out on November 9th on Bloodshot Records, which is a Chicago record label. And basically me and Adam and Mark, we started working on songs at the beginning of this year, not really with an intent behind them, but just getting together every other couple week or so, and just like would come out of a week-long session with 2 or 3 songs. And then by, I think it was like April or May, we realized like, oh, we have a record. And I really wanted to record the record, even if it didn't totally make sense to other people. So we booked time in Mark's studio. Mark plays bass. He also has a studio in Michigan, and Mark tours with Against Me. He does front of house for us, and he recorded the last couple Against Me records. So the 3 of us went to Michigan, and we spent 7 days, and we recorded 14 songs. And then we had a record, and I've discovered that Bloodshot Records was right around the corner from my apartment. So I went in there one day and I was like, hey, give us a record deal, put out this record. And they were like, okay. So then they're gonna put out the record. And yeah, that's a good amount. Maybe not everything. In 2015, I released a book in 2016, but leading up to that in 2015, I was doing some touring in the US that was like kind of these shows where I would read from what was going to become the book, and then I would like play some songs too. And so I asked Adam and Mark to come along and to do the shows with me, and they were into it. And then I was like, oh, well, this needs a name. You know, we got to call it something because it's not just me. So it came up with the name The Devouring Mothers. I was inspired by the French feminist artist Niki de Saint-Phalle, who we were in, was it in Bilbao at the Guggenheim? She had an exhibit, and it was an incredible exhibit, like mind-blowing exhibit. So that was where I first discovered her. But the concept of the Devouring Mothers isn't necessarily a concept that's unique to her. She didn't invent the concept. It's just about like ego and eating the ego, and yeah. That's a very important song. I mean, it's become Black Me Out has become a really important song in the Against Me catalog, in that people like the song, so we play it every night. But I'm really big when it comes to songwriting on writing songs that are like mission statements or lines in the sand, you know, like drawing a line and everything on that side is on one team and everything on the other side is on another team. And at the time that I wrote Black Me Out, that was like a real definitive line in the sand where it was either you're on this side or fuck you. You know, I think that maybe there's something like bigger and subconscious behind it where I'm like, oh, you know, like every 10 years I get an itch or something like that. But also like being honest, it's like if you just like, if anyone ever, no one really ever picks up on it, but if you look at it from kind of like a little bit of a distance, where in 2008, I put out a record that was me and a drum machine, and then the next Against Me record we had a different drummer, and then with this record, you know, like we put out a record where Mark plays bass, and now there's a different bass player in Against Me. Obviously, like there was maybe some problems going on in Against Me where the creative relationship wasn't totally fulfilling, you know, but I don't know. I think that music shouldn't be about monogamy. I think music should be a non-monogamous relationship, and that you should be free to create music with other people, and that it shouldn't be constrained. Anytime you try to put something in a box, that's a creativity killer. As long as like there's no borders and there's no boxes, then you can do anything and you can go anywhere with something. It's tough. Like I've done a couple records producing for other bands. In punk rock in particular, punk bands tend to be like, hey, will you produce this record? And then you're like, yeah. And then they're like, we don't actually want a producer. And then they fight against any idea the producer has the whole time. You know, that's like, we were that punk band, you know, but that like from the other side, it's interesting to see that. But I don't know, like I think any experience where like you can see things from a different angle is valuable, you know? So if you're only the singer in a band or only the guitar player, that's gonna be your only experience, and that's limiting, you know? And if you get the chance to do something, play a role within a band that isn't your normal role, then you're gonna grow from that, and you're gonna learn from that, and you're gonna see things from a different perspective. And being like producing records, being in studios with other bands, you're like, oh, we say that sometimes, and we probably sound just as stupid when we say that, you know, or like whatever, you know, or oh dang, we should have stuck up for that idea, you know, like, or whatever. You just see it from a different way. I have this weird like relationship with nostalgia where I hate nostalgia, but also I really like nostalgia, or I'll get nostalgic. It's like a self-hatred thing, I think, where I'm like, oh, I miss that. I hate myself for missing that, you know? I'm still fixated on Axl Rose, I'll be honest with you. I mean, Guns N' Roses were that band for me. When I was like 8 years old especially, like, goddamn, I loved Guns N' Roses. I used to sit at my bus stop and sing all the words to Night Train. I still know all the words to Night Train. And I just thought they were taking a train at night. I didn't realize they were talking about an alcohol or anything like that, you know? But they were just like the coolest band, you know? Like I got into like metal bands when I was younger, hair metal bands, and like, you know, there was Poison and there was Motley Crue and there was all those bands, but Guns N' Roses were like real. That you could just tell by looking at them. You could like smell the alcohol and cigarette smoke, and like they just looked tough, you know. And it just like I just fell in love with Guns N' Roses. I grew up overseas. I grew up in Italy, and so when I was growing up until I was like 12, when I moved to the States, I didn't have MTV. So like getting into bands like Guns N' Roses and stuff like that, it was just kind of me going to the record store, looking at a cover and being like, that's a cool album cover, I'll buy that, or looking at Hit Parade or magazine. So when I was 12, I moved back to the US, and that was my first time seeing MTV, and that was like right when Nirvana came out and when Smells Like Teen Spirit was playing on MTV. So it was like, you know, first of all, there was like, oh my God, MTV, all these videos, you know, and then it was like, what is Nirvana? And I mean, Nirvana just like kind of blew away everything that had come before it for me musically. They were like a real turning point. Within the last decade in particular, transvisibility like has just risen across the world, it feels like, you know, and a lot of that time it's within a pop culture context, whether that's musicians or other artists or actors, actresses, whatever. And when you have that happen, like it starts the conversation, and that's important, that's really important. Whether or not that translates into actually any changes, oftentimes is debatable, you know. In the US in particular, it felt like there was real progress being made, and then Trump was elected, and now it just seems like chaos, and I don't know what's gonna happen, you know. But it seems like at some points there were progress. There just needs to be so much more. Well, I had no resources. I had nowhere to turn. I had no education. I had no one that would listen to me. The people that I did have around me either like, you know, paid for me to see psychiatrists who had no idea what was going on, or you know, or punished me with arresting me or whatever. You know, but having no resources, it's hard to hypothesize looking back of what you wish. But I do think that in general, like, you know, there's kind of the hypocrisy being pointed out is that you have people, you know, transgender people being like, I need help. I need, you know, there's something different about me. I need help. You should see a doctor. You see a doctor, the doctor says, here's how to cure yourself. You should transition. And then people are like, oh, well, you shouldn't listen to the doctor, you know, or like what? It's, you know, people need resources. That's the bottom line. I'm trying to think how to explain, you know, because there's like my life, as I'm saying, when like I go out and I'm in a band and I'm on tour and I'm playing in my band, and then there's my life when I'm at home and I'm waking up and I take my daughter to school and I come back and I don't see anybody. I don't have, like, I live in Chicago, I don't go out, I don't have friends in Chicago, you know, like I don't have any kind of life in Chicago other than like working and being a parent. But some of that, you know, sure, some of that I feel like is like, okay, being transgender is an isolating experience. Most of the time I do not feel welcome in public spaces and I don't feel like I relate to most people. There's that too. But then there's also like, but also I'm 38 years old, and as you get like older, it gets harder to make friends and it gets harder to have a social life, and you know, things just change. So there's a little bit of both. And then also there's like And then I do this really unique, odd thing of that I play in a band, and I've played in a band for like 20 some odd years, you know, so you have this completely unrelatable existence, you know, of like, when you do meet someone, you're like, hey, you're cool, we should hang out. I'm gonna go, I'll be back in a month. We'll hang out then, you know, like it's just like, makes for oftentimes, you know, like really stunted relationships, or like, you know, you wanna talk about, what'd you do today? Well, I was in Santiago and I did this radio station interview and it was really great, and then we went and played a show, and most people back in Chicago, maybe they couldn't relate to that experience, you know, they would think you were like bragging or something like that, when really that was just, that's what we did today, you know? I don't know. In the last 5 years, as far as audience changing, I do think that like there's an element of people feeling welcome at the shows who maybe didn't feel welcome otherwise. It always makes me happy to meet people who are like, hey, I used to listen to Against Me, and then I stopped listening to Against Me, and then I transitioned, and I heard that you came out as trans, and then I started listening to Against Me, and I feel good going to your shows again. That makes me happy, you know? In general, like I feel like we've always been kind of lucky as a band where we have a wide variety of audience, and I think that a lot of the times that's from touring with different types of bands and not just touring with the same type of band. So, you know, you go out and you tour with the Foo Fighters and you bring back Foo Fighters fans. You tour with Green Day, you bring back Green Day fans. You tour with Mastodon, you bring back Mastodon fans. And none of them are just like one type of person. So when we look out in the audience, like I always feel like I see young and old people and people of all different kinds of diversity. It's something that I've been called like for years. A lot of that had to do with being in a punk band that started out in the DIY scene and then got on bigger record labels. And I understand the argument of like, you know, why it's bad to mix capitalism and art. And I understand like a lot of those perspectives, but that's just been something that's followed my band all around. But it's not something that I've agreed with, you know? Like to me, selling out always meant giving up on your hopes and dreams and doing something that you hated. For us, you know, signing to a major label, we signed to Sire, and that was the record label of the Ramones, that was the Replacements, that was Echo and the Bunnymen, the Rezillos, like so many good punk bands that we looked up to. And you do like, you know, that's like a cliche that people say oftentimes of like, oh, you know, you want to get the music out there, but it does get the music out there, you know? And at the end of the day, like a record label is a record label is a record label, and some record labels do this good and some record labels do this thing good, you know? Like, it's just all about the people that you're working with, you know? I think that oftentimes as a band, we'll be like, wouldn't it have been cool to be a band in the 70s? And I do think it would have been cool to have been a band in the 70s as opposed to now. I think it would have been a far different experience. But I think everything's what you make of it, you know? And that there's so many opportunities now to reach people where you don't have gatekeepers, where before you would have had gatekeepers, you know, people standing between you and an audience. Whereas now the internet kind of levels that playing field. But, you know, I think bottom line, end of the day, it's always about the songs. And as long as you write good songs, those songs will find an audience. I think if you're in a punk band and you don't consider anything you're doing political, then you're not actually in a punk band, and it doesn't have anything to do with punk. You know, like even if you're in a punk band that's only singing about emotions and how you feel, there's still politics to that, and you just have to recognize that, you know, like the way you treat people around you, the way you have relationships, like there's politics to all of it. How has my life changed with this new? First of all, you know, the election day was on my birthday. That was the worst birthday ever. I like saw the results and I was like, oh, fuck this, I'm just going to bed. It was terrible, terrible birthday. In general though, everything feels more, I live with a lot more fear, you know, like there's so much more uncertainty and instability, and you're just kind of waiting to see what happens, you know. Hi, I'm Laura Jane Grace from Against Me, and this is Sonar.